Everyone, it's Shannon here for Pinkfresh Studio. In today's video, I'm going to share with you a couple ways to add depth to your stenciled images. Today we'll be using the new floral print circle layered stencil set. This is a beautiful stencil that creates that circle design of florals. There are 5 stencils in this set. We are actually going to start with the 4th stencil here. These stencils are clearly labeled. You can see it there at the top left. You see stencil 4. There's also little corner markers to help you center the front of an A2 card base or an A2 panel. And at the bottom you should see Pinkfresh's logo at the bottom. That's also a way to know that you have your stencil facing the right way. So I'm just going to center this here, again using those little corner lines to help me, and then I'll use a couple pieces of painter's tape to hold the stencil and my A2 panel of white cardstock in place. I'm going to start by simply ink blending these leaves with Olive. This is a Pinkfresh dye ink. As you can see, I'm using my foam blending tools. You can definitely use brushes if you prefer. Once I kind of get this base coat down of the olive, then I'm going to move to a darker shade of green. This is Evergreen, and I'm angling my blending tool here so I can just get a little bit of this darker shade of green at kind of the base of the leaves and the stems. This is just going to add a little bit of shape and definition. So this is one way to kind of add a little bit of depth to your images. So once I finish with that darker shade, I'll remove that stencil and then I'll hold up to the camera so you can see some of that change in color. That's really going to add some more depth to this image. So now that I'm done with that stencil, I'm moving on to stencil number 3. Again, I'm using the guide lines that are on the stencil to help me center it. And I'm going to start here first with Lemon Whip, which is a very beautiful light yellow color. Just simply ink blend those flowers. Then I'm going to move on to Marigold, kind of a dark yellow, and again angling my ink blending tool so I get just the base of the flower with this darker shade of yellow. And again, that's going to add some volume, some shape to these flowers, and really we're starting to build a lot of layers and depth here. I'm moving on to stencil 5. Now we're going to do this stencil in 2 parts. I'm actually going to mask off all the areas for the flowers, so all those details for the flowers. I'm using a micro pour tape here. I put a piece down and then kind of trim it anywhere that tape kind of falls on top of the leaf openings, because that's what I'm going to ink blend first. And I'm just going to repeat this process till I get all 5 of those flower details covered up with the micro pour tape. So now that those are all kind of masked off, I'm ready to ink blend my leaves. I have a couple kind of blue-green colors picked out. I'm going to start by ink blending with my lighter kind of blue-green color. Just simply ink blending over those leaves, really quick and basic. This is just my base color. And once I finish with my Aquamarine, I'm going to move to Mermaid Cove, which is a little bit darker shade. And again, just like I did with my first set of leaves, I'm going to ink blend this darker shade at the base of the leaves and the stems. And it's okay if I don't get this perfectly in the right spot. You just want to get a little bit of that darker shade down there. You want to make sure you still keep that lighter shade so you get that contrast, but just a little bit of that darker shade, that Mermaid Cove, is really going to help to make these flowers start to pop and have some shape. So now that I've finished with the leaves, I went ahead and cleaned that same stencil, so I'm still using stencil 5, and now I'm going to just ink blend the flower details with Marigold. So that same color I used before on the flowers, that darker yellow, and I am using a brush here because these are a little bit more delicate and I can avoid getting the leaves too yellow. But if you do get a little bit of that yellow on the leaves, because the aquamarine was such a dark color, it's going to work out okay. So we're now moving on to our next stencil, and we're going to quickly ink blend these little flowers first with Ballet Slipper, and then we're going to move on to Coral Reef, and again angling my blending tool just so I can get the base of the flowers with that darker kind of pink red color. Now that I'm finished with the Coral Reef, I'm going to grab my second stencil, or stencil 2 I should say, and I'm going to ink blend the details for these little flowers in Coral Reef. And that goes really quick, and we're actually now done with all of our stenciling. So I'll hold up to the camera here. You can see how beautiful this image is once you get all the stenciling done, and a lot of depth there by using colored inks and kind of partial blending. We're now going to move on to my second way for adding depth to these stencil images, which is by adding a shadow. I'm going to use Copic markers to do this. I'm starting with my darker gray, which is C3, and I'm coloring right against that stenciled image on the left and bottom side of the leaves and flowers. This is going to just make these images pop. Now, I'm not always consistent. I don't always color the left and bottom side of all of these leaves and flowers. Sometimes I make a little bit of mistakes here and there. So I do want to point out that you don't need to stress about coloring the exact the exact side or every single time. Just try to avoid going completely around your flowers or leaves. That will kind of make it look a little bit off. So now that I finished with my darker shade of gray, I moved on to my lighter shade, which is C1, and all I'm doing now is just going back over where I colored with that darker shade, not going right up to the stenciled image this time, kind of coloring just a little bit over where that darker gray kind of meets the white of the paper, and that will actually create kind of a gradation and just soften that shadow a little bit. I'm just finishing up this last leaf here, which I missed, and did the C3 and C1 on that one, and now I'm actually ready to wrap this all up. I did stamp and heat emboss a sentiment. This is from the Modern Layered Florals stamp set, and now I'm going to first adhere my panel to my card front. I did also trim this panel down about 1/8 of an inch on all 4 sides. That's going to make a nice little white border, and then I'm going to stick down my sentiment with some foam adhesive, and my card is done. And I'll hold it up to the camera so hopefully you can get a good look at all of the layers and the depth, and especially that shadow. I do think that little subtle shadow really helps to make these flowers and leaves kind of pop away from the page. And that little bit of ink blending where we used a darker shade on the leaves and the flowers, I do think helps add a little bit more shape to the flowers and leaves as well. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you want any more information on the products I use, please head over to Pinkfresh. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.